And then one quick thing on deferred commitment. One of the interesting things is if we're trying to build change-tolerant software, the thing that we have to recognize is most of the software is not brand new stuff. Most of the software is stuff put on systems that were already there. 60 to 80% of what we develop is developed on existing systems. So if we have a development process that anticipates change, we're going to have a software process that will tolerate change. So you can run a process that says change will happen, so let's make sure that we have it thought about so that when change happens, we can handle it. Which means you need an architecture to handle change, you need a development process to handle change, you need a testing framework to handle change, so that change is not strange, it's expected and it's good. So there's two strategies here. One strategy, if stuff is easy to change, and that's why we do iterations, when stuff is easy to change later, you make decisions reversible. So I put something in this code, and I'll refactor it when I add some more complexity, and I'll keep it clean. But if you're going to do something that is expensive to change, and there are decisions you make that are expensive to change, you want to hold off and make those decisions as late as you possibly can, so that you put as much knowledge into the decision and as much testing as you possibly can. And you probably want to try multiple options and make sure you know what you're doing before you make expensive decisions. Okay? And then let's go on to deliver fast. That's another one of my favorite ones. Okay, so I'll talk about the Empire State Building because this is a building, by the way, that was delivered way faster than any other building of its size in the world, forever. It was built in the 1930s. And so back then they didn't have computers, right? And in August of 1929, they started thinking about building it. And they did some financial projections, that said 85 stories is the best economic height there is. Of course, that was bogus. That was fake. All they wanted to do was to build the highest building in the world, so they, found a way to prove that 85 was the highest, was the best. And they signed a contract on September 22nd, and on September 21st, and the next day they started demolition. And on January 22nd, 1930, they started digging a hole. And on March 17th, they started putting the steel in place. And 8 months later, this is what it looked like. Just like that, except not the top. 8 months it went from, from the bottom to the top. Really remarkable. And, if you take a look at the way in which they did that, because it's still there, it's still standing, nobody says it's unsafe, it actually works, and in fact it was also one of the safest construction projects of its time. You learn a lot about speed, because speed goes hand in hand with discipline and high quality, and with people who know what they're doing. So in this case, the building opened on May 1st for a very good reason, because in New York City at the time, that's when all building leases started. You might notice what happened right after September 22nd, 1929, the next month. Yeah, Black Friday, the market crash. All the other buildings that were going to be built got canceled, but this one got built. And part of the reason it got built was because they were really trying to get the money in and the money back as fast as they possibly could. Cash flow thinking. And it was exactly on time and 18% under budget. And you say, wow, how did they do that? Because it hasn't been done again. But interestingly, it was done the year before. These two buildings were built. This one here is the Chrysler building. It's 66 stories tall. It was built in 18 months. This is 40 Wall Street. It's now the Trump Tower. It was also 66 stories tall up to here, and it was built in 12 months, including demolition, by the same builders who built this. Really fast. And the reason they were able to do it fast, in my opinion, was because they didn't think about building the way we do. And one thing they didn't have then was computers. So they didn't. And so they couldn't lay out, this is going to happen here, and this is going to happen here, and this is dependent upon this, and all that scheduling kind of stuff. It just wasn't possible. So they had to think about how they scheduled the building in a totally different way. And it's that different way of thinking that, after this Depression, no more buildings were built of this height for a long time. Then there was a war, and no more buildings were built. It was 40 years before buildings of that height was built again, and by that time they'd pretty much forgotten how to do it. What they did was they focused on flow. Flow of what? What's the hardest problem of building this thing?
Materials.
Getting the materials on site. So how do you get those many materials on site? Is you think about the flow of materials, and this is the steel schedule. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this is not much different than iterations or conduct. If you think about a cumulative forward diagram, anybody who's seen one of those, this is what this is. This says January through September, 0 to 85 stories. The first column is when the design of that floor was going to happen in the steel. Second column was when the order went to the mill. Third column was when the mill got the detailed design. They didn't even get the detailed design until way later. This one was when it was delivered on site, and then it's when it was put up within a week. So very, very fast construction, because when something was there, they had to just get the material there, and the people appeared and put it up. And that was true not just for the steel, it was true for the 4 major things they did on the outside. Stainless steel, concrete floor, exterior, middle window and trims. There were separate columns. There's middle window and trim, stone. So they could do them separate from each other. So they said that they didn't want to just have decoupled architecture. They had decoupled schedules. Have you ever thought about scheduling in a decoupled schedule manner? You go back to a system architecture. Can you decouple the schedules? That's what they did. They decoupled the schedules of each of these main flows so they could flow at different rates and not have cascading delays. And each one was very fast. What did they do to allow fast to work? Because if you can get these things in place, you can allow fast to work. And if you can't, maybe you can't get fast to work. One is teamwork of 3 contracting parties: owner, architect, and builder. And the Lean Construction Institute says that typically, when you have 3 parties, not 2 involved in the contract, you get better results. But these guys work together to meet the objective. It was no, somebody contracts and the architect keeps saying, I want more, I want more. Does that sound familiar? Well, the owner wasn't saying, I want more, I want more. The architect and the owner and the builder were all working together to build within the constraints. Secondly, they had deeply experienced builders. They knew what they were doing. They've been building these things for decades. So they weren't guessing. They knew what they were doing. They focused on material flow. They had up to 500 trucks a day going through that building, back before there were computers. They decoupled the workflows, as I said, and they had cash flow thinking. So any given day was a $10,000 cost, they said, which is $120,000 US dollars today, which meant they could spend that much money to save a day. And they did. They spent that much money to save a day. And lastly, they didn't start by designing the building and say, I wonder how much time this is going to take to build. They didn't do that. They said, we have these constraints. We've got this much money, we've got this much time. Let's design the building to be able to be built in that much time. The building was designed to be built fast. They had these constraints: 2 acres of land. They had zoning ordinances, which caused us setbacks. They had 35 million of capital. That was it, no more. In fact, the builder signed a fixed price contract before there was a design. They had the laws of physics, which they couldn't violate. And then there was the deadline of May 1st, 1931. And the builder, architect, and owner worked as a team to design a building that could be done in that window of time. So if we go back to the concept of what are the 10 high-level business objectives of your system, and how can you design a system to deliver on those 10 constraints, what do you have to do to make that work? It's a much better question to ask than, here, give me a list of the next things that I should be doing. Questions?